Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
What if you could double your energy naturally without caffeine or stimulants in just 3 short months? It's not only possible, you can transform every aspect of your health if you follow the 12-week blueprint we've created for you in the Awesome Health System. The Awesome Health System is a free course where you receive a daily video lesson spanning the most cutting-edge secrets for air, water, exercise, sunshine, optimizers, mindset, and education. It's something most companies would charge hundreds of dollars for, yet you get it for free when you go to bioptimizers.com. To access your course, register to download the PDF report called 3 Phases of Bioptimization, which gets you access to the report and daily access to the first lesson in the 12-week, 84-day Awesome Health course.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today's guest is Tony Wrighton. We're going to be talking about behavioral longevity. And this is an aspect that's not spoken a lot, but it's the intersection of mindset, daily habits, and long-term health. Just to give you an example, Yale did a study, and they were showing that a negative mindset around aging can reduce lifespan by 7.5 years, which is a bigger effect than smoking, obesity, or high cholesterol. So Tony is going to share some insights. He's a best-selling author, published in 13 languages, host of the Biohacking News podcast, and one of the world's leading coaches in behavioral wellness and human performance. A former national broadcaster for Sky and ITV, Tony now specializes in behavioral longevity, the science of how habits, mindset, and daily choices shape your health span and lifespan. He's also, somewhat unexpectedly, the world's best-selling histamine intolerance author, and he joins us today from Europe. He's hanging out in Portugal, which is an interesting country for sure these days. A lot of people are in Europe are flocking there, and they're loving the lifestyle. And he's taken the time to talk about how your attitude and your behavioral can influence your longevity. And I often believe this. I'll quote, I want to share something. For most people don't know, I had 3 centenarians that lived on the little street that I grew up on as a kid. 3 of them. And like, there's like literally 12 people or something on the street in this little area. And 3 of them lived to be over 100. The rest all lived into their late 90s. And what is it? And latest one, Annie, she just died at 106 years old. And she had the best attitude. She didn't do any biohacking. She worked in her garden. She knitted socks. She was always motivated about and always had something to do and very positive attitude, and just went out and did it. Despite her failing health and falling apart, she'd crawl out to her garden and things like that. And most of the centenarians that I noticed in that little community, they don't do any of the biohacking stuff that we're advocating, but they have great attitudes, a sense of purpose, family, these type of things. So I'm interested, Tony, what have you discovered around longevity and behavioral and mindset and attitudes and habits that contribute to longevity? And maybe you could stack the biohacking stuff with the behavioral mindset stuff to maybe even extend life, or certainly the quality of life, indefinitely.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Wade. It's great to be here. And I guess over the last 15, 20 years or so, I've been an author on biohacking and behavior change. And as you said, histamine intolerance, which I can come on to in a sec. But I was sort of always quite interested in the intersection between the two and whether there was a way to combine the two. And after a while, I started walking around at many of the conferences and summits that you and I go to, and I started to sort of observe a lot of the biohackers who are really into the supplements and the workouts and the hacks, but deep down they're a little bit anxious or wired or overstimulated, and they overlook what I would call a sort of longevity mindset. And that is, at a deep level, have they got the beliefs and the behaviors that make them happy and healthy now, and then sort of increase their longevity score, or how long they might live in the future. And I think it's a bit of a problem, actually. I think a lot of the biohackers on paper live a really healthy life. But when it comes down to it, a lot of us are real type A left brain personalities. And that's why we get into biohacking in the first place. We want to track the hell out of everything. And actually, we need to do a little bit of the deep work, sort out our behavior and our habits, and start to reframe the way we think about ourselves. Not just recover our bodies, but sort of rewire our brains at the same time.
Right now I'm taking a course from Jordan Peterson Academy and studying Nietzschean philosophy. I've always been a fan of Nietzsche, and I like Jordan, who's a deep student of that. Illustrates what was very unusual and profound about the Nietzschean model. And he said that, well, he was paying attention to what was not said as much as what was said by any given person, meaning that he felt that there is all these unsaid axioms that people come up with what they pay attention to or what they profess or what they're doing. And what you're identifying here, if I heard you correctly, is that there's an assumptive belief within the biohacking industry that if I track this, or I look at this marker, I look at this is going to lead to some extension of one's life or quality of life, let's say, or likely both. So, but within that formulaic element, whatever those hacks are that they've stacked together, there's a whole bunch of scenarios that may not have been considered, because the foundational aspect that they're projecting is that there's these devices and supplements and practices all lead to this outcome, which can't be validated or verified if you actually look at it. Like, how do you know that everything that your favorite biohacking advocate is doing is going to allow them to live to be 180 years old, as some are professing? Well, it's an awesome claim and a statement. It's an aspirational goal, but it's not verifiable.
Yeah.
And there may be a whole host of elements, such as behavioral or attitudinal elements, that actually contribute more than your sleep score. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's take three controversial figures of fame. I'm going to go back to the late, great George Burns, who was a comedian in the United States, who was booking gigs at 100 years old and would do his show smoking cigars. Okay. And he drank and he smoked cigars, and he was doing comedy at 100 years old. Pretty robust lives to be relevant in the public domain at 100 years old. That's almost nobody achieves that. Then you have a guy like Warren Buffett and his late partner, Charlie Munger, just died recently, late in his 90s. Warren's in his 90s now. He eats McDonald's and drinks Coke every day. There's a Coke machine in his house. And eats McDonald's, goes to the drive-thru every day. But he's very passionate about his numbers and his business. And then you have a guy, let's say the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, a controversial figure, who sleeps approximately 4 hours a day and is almost 80 years old and seems to be vibrant and full of energy and lives on McDonald's cheeseburgers and no sleep and an insanely stressful lifestyle. Half the world hates him. He's making decisions that determine and all the negativity that's directed to him, which would crush most people. He seems to be fine. So there are, just on those three observational elements, would seem to me would validate there are other elements outside of the vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids are the things that you do. So what have you determined?
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, isn't it? If you peel back the layers, you can't see what Warren Buffett's belief system is around aging, around longevity, around his body. We can't tell, can we? But presumably it's probably pretty good. And then what I've discovered is that there's a surprising amount of science that suggests that actually what's going on in our head, our belief systems, and then our behavior really are sort of more influential on how long we live than whether we're getting in the ice bath every morning or whether we're taking a little different supplement. So, for example, you mentioned the study which shows that if we got a positive belief system around aging, then that's we're going to live for 7 years longer potentially in this study, and that's better than diet changes for cholesterol, for giving up smoking, all sorts of different things. But there are other studies as well, so many. I mean, Ellen Langer has done so many brilliant psychological studies, and she's one of my favorite to follow. And one study, she sent a group of men in their 70s to a retreat for a few weeks. And in this retreat, everything was like it was 20 years ago. So they had old films, they got them to talk about old wars, they got them playing games like they did 20 years ago. And at the end of it, these men not only were moving around way more freely, their bodies were freer, they had less aches and pains, but then Ellen Langer did a load of tests as well and found that, their markers were down, their longevity markers were looking much better, all because they were just thinking younger. So it's sort of obvious, and yet it actually takes some deep work. And the problem is, everyone wants to live longer in our world, but nobody wants to sit still for 20 minutes and meditate or actually really think about this problem or do some deep work.
I saw another recent study on women who have children in their 40s. So my wife is now a qualified member of that camp. We just had a young son.
Congratulations, by the way,
Thank
Wade.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And it turns out that women who have children in their 40s tend to live longer, which you would think
Right.
from a complete limited resource model, a Malthusian type mentality on limited resources within the physiology of that system of
Mm.
being the human being and the cost of having a child, you would think that that would be actually detrimental to a woman's longevity. And it's inverted. So in other words, if you have a child in your 40s, and so all those ladies that are out there running around trying to find a mate in your 30s or 40s, you know what? There's hope for you. It might be the best longevity strategy out there. I don't know. We can't confirm it, but I thought that was really interesting. So what I'm trying to do is draw a correlation to what you're saying. What is it within beliefs that, or perspective that what does it activate? What does it shift within the system that could potentially lead to better longevity outcomes or better health outcomes?
Well, by the way, there are other studies showing that the more that we sort of parents, for example, live longer than non-parents. I mean, that is another very interesting one. Why is that? Because as you know, Wade, right now, you're probably not getting very much sleep. You're not getting as much sleep as non-parents. And yet, parents live longer. And so there must be something else around purpose, around giving, around selflessness that we sort of don't quite understand. I mean, the link between a poor belief system around one's health and a low sort of longevity is so well established. And people like Dr. Joe Dispenza have sort of spoken around this so much, and Ellen Langer's work on this as well. What we want to do is sort of try to examine why that is and what we can do around it. And I had a I mean, this is how I got into biohacking, Wade, because 10 years ago, I was already qualified in all the NLP stuff and I'd already written a lot of the best-selling books. I was already printed in 12 languages 10 years ago, but it didn't give me enough when I got really ill and I went off to the Philippines and I caught this mystery bug. It was horrendous. And I was working in TV at the time. I had 3 months in bed. Not only could I not go to my TV work, I couldn't even walk down the street. And the problem was that my mindset around it was absolutely atrocious. Spending 12 hours a day on Dr. Google, trying to figure out what was going on. Such a biohacker, think I can figure everything out if I just spend a little bit more time online. And now, of course, it's ChatGPT rather than Google. And actually, what I needed to do is switch on my parasympathetic nervous system and allow my fight or flight response to dampen down and start to heal. That's a really stark example, but it's sort of worthwhile because I do tend to work quite a bit with people who often will have quite serious illnesses, and it's they find it quite offensive, the suggestion that what's going on in their head is contributing to some of their symptoms. Their symptoms and their illness is real, but of course, your body can't start to heal until you switch off the sympathetic nervous system. So we know that link is established. We just have to find a way of doing it.
I know in Eastern philosophy, often understanding mindset around longevity is a big element. And I'm a big fan of Eastern philosophy. I've been meditating for many, many years. And I can recall an illustration in autobiography of a yogi between Yogananda's guru and his guru. And the teacher was saying, "Oh, today you made yourself sick. Tomorrow you healed yourself. The next day, who knows what happens the next day?" The guy got sick again. And he was using this illustrative purpose to demonstrate how the mind actually impacted illness and sickness. The other thing that you can look at is the retirement statistics on health outcomes. How many people just have no health issues and then they go to retire, especially people who define their lives by their work, and they have suboptimal outcomes when they retire, that the life expectancy drops off precipitously. And you have to and then you also see people who take retirement and take up other projects and other ideas and connection within their community, and they often have a second life, if you will, after work, or as an advisor or small time work or project or community focused stuff. And I think that seems to have a very big contributing factor to longevity as well, social interactions.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I tell you what, the pickleball community here in Portugal is absolutely huge. And that seems to give people a lot of purpose, and they're all hanging out together. You've got the community, you've got the exercise, there are competitions. It's a whole different sort of sense of purpose in early retirement for a lot of people here.
Wonderful. So what else do you think, what are the habits and rituals or mindsets that you think can lead to those positive outcomes, given let's take that as an axiomatic perspective.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I guess two sets. I want to explore the dark side, which we touched on beforehand. Is
Yeah.
that like are people who are leaning in the biohacking world trying to offset some sort of anxiety element, or are they uh, going down a route of proactively, positively integrating these things? And I've
Mm.
always thought that when someone is building a habitual routine, if it's leading towards a goal, I think some of the benefit is just the reaffirmation that you are doing things to support that outcome, whatever they might be. So the belief in the belief in the ritual is as important as the ritual or product or service itself. What do you think on that? What have you found?
So what do you mean about sort of affirmations? Do you mean the more
Yeah,
they
so so
they
for so
repeat
so
it?
so for example, I get up in the morning, I come downstairs, I do my protein shake, and I take a whole array of nutritional supplements. And every time I take these things, or before my meals, and before I have all these periodic rituals, actually stacked throughout the day that I've built up over a lifetime of this. And I go do my exercise and I do this. And I feel every time I'm doing this, I'm reaffirming health. I'm reaffirming that this is contributing to a positive outcome. And I've often thought that just the reaffirmation of that seems to be extremely potent on its own, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Well, it was Emile Coué, the 18th century French professor, who got all his students wandering around a garden. They were all sort of ill in some way. A lot of them had sort of things like tuberculosis, and he would get them to repeat every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. And he found that their health outcomes started to improve. Just a classic sort of affirmations, which you will now find all sorts of sort of apps that can flash affirmations up on your phone at any time, and that can be quite powerful. And as you say, my followers, they're already all biohackers. They're already deep into this world, perhaps a bit obsessively at some points, and they do all the right things on paper, and yet they're anxious and overstimulated, and probably stay up past their bedtime looking at pictures of other healthy people on Instagram. So it's about It's about trying to encourage them to develop healthy habits on a sort of very surface environment and behavior perspective. And then at a deeper level, sort of rewiring those thoughts because you come down in the morning and you tell yourself, I'm taking this supplement, therefore I'm feeling better. And by the way, I know about this stuff because I have to work on it really hard. I've always been a little bit health anxious. And health anxiety is something that's like, I think we're all so overstimulated mainly because of screens and the sort of overconnected sort of nature of our lives that the more we're overconnected, the more we get stimulated around things like health anxiety. And it's about reframing now. And that is what I had to do at a very deep level to start to heal when I got ill, when I went to the jungle and I got the virus. I actually went to see this guy in London who specialized in NLP, which is what I specialized in, and then he did EFT as well, which is tapping. And
Yeah.
emotional freedom therapy, and I thought I'm not into all that nonsense, but he does a bit of NLP, so I'll go and see him. And after 10 minutes, he was tapping away on me, and I was in floods of tears, and it was sort of releasing so much emotion. And for the first time, I thought, oh, I think I'm actually going to start to get better. And he told me, he said it's really hard for people with chronic fatigue issues to understand, but you are sort of what's going on in your head is contributing to your physical symptoms, and we're going to have to create these pattern interrupts to start to get you to think differently and think about your health in a different way.
That's fascinating. I
Yeah.
know Tony Robbins, if anyone's ever gone to his events, his Date with Destiny is a pretty potent event. I've actually attended it years ago, and I don't think you fully grasp the full capacity of NLP until you do like an event that he does. And
Mhm.
he creates an incredible amount of disruptive pattern disruptions
Mm.
and then helps you re-examine and then re-anchor new patterns of thoughts and values. And he just did, for example, uh, a podcast with Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson. And what happened is Tony commissioned a study on people who were suffering from depression that went to his events. And it turned out he was able to produce better outcomes than cognitive behavioral therapy and pharmaceutical intervention
Wow.
by a significant margin.
Yeah.
This study was published a couple of years ago. And Peterson said, well, this is fascinating. I want to go find out what he's doing as a thing. And I was shocked at the start of the interview. He's like, well, how many other people have examined this literature? And Tony's like, well, you're the first qualified professor to actually come and examine it.
Mm.
And so and Peterson, I think, did a great job of going into this and then cross-correlating it with the believing the elements, and was profoundly moved by the number one, the quality of the study, the length of the study, the duration, and the validity of the study. So this wasn't some pseudo study that was, we need more research. This was a definable proof about, and that's what Tony is essentially doing. He's helping you rewire these unconscious belief systems or these directions that lead you to the behaviors that you have, and then re-anchors new patterns. And he's really good at it. And I studied NLP with Bandler and Grinder and
Oh,
the whole
great.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me
yeah,
too.
way back in the day. And I know
Yeah.
from my own self, in a variety of areas of my life, it had a profound impact. My wife is also a practitioner
Mm.
as well. She does hypnotherapy as well. And then the third level, we do neurofeedback to even bypass it, even again, of all conscious patterns like precognitive patterning in the brain.
Mm.
So I think it's a great time to be doing this. What are some of the elements that you find that helps, like from a ritualistic perspective, that might lead to better outcomes?
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, on that theme of NLP and tapping, I have found that I ended up training in the tapping because I loved it and I use it occasionally with clients. And I think, as a sort of basic pattern interrupt, there's something else. It's not just about the energy flowing around the body. It's just so weird what you're doing. And I had a great example here in Portugal, when we moved here, my son goes to a fully Portuguese school, and everyone says, "Oh, they're sponges. You send them to a foreign school, they'll pick up the language in no time. It'll be really easy." And actually, he really struggled at first going to a Portuguese school because all the other kids in his school were Portuguese, and his teacher didn't speak any English at all, which made it quite hard for me to talk to her about Stan. I had to pick up some Portuguese quite quickly. But what I discovered worked really well was the tapping, and I would tap, I would encourage, firstly, when he was sort of too young, I'd be tapping on him. And then when we were driving to school, he'd be saying, "Daddy, I don't want to go to school." And we'd start tapping. And it was amazing how it changed his state. And I started to realize after a while there's a really weird side effect of the tapping, which proved to me that it was working, which is that every time I do tapping with him, it seems to make him want to go for a poo.
Oh,
Which,
interesting.
which tells me that and so now if he's a little bit blocked up, I know the tapping will work. Which shows that it's really having quite a relaxing effect. I mean, it really works on kids. So we want to try using that once your boy gets a little bit older.
That's fascinating. Yeah, because what you're saying is you're moving from sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system
Yeah,
immediately. And
yeah,
a lot of elements around constipation are totally related to that. It's permanently being sympathetic nervous system, digestive health issues contribute to brain dysfunction and dysregulation, misuse of nutrient absorption. So you could be doing all the right things in a suboptimal cognitive or neurological or neurophysiological state, but they're not actually being delivered into the system because you're not in that parasympathetic relax and rest and relax zone, as
yeah,
opposed to being sympathetically stimulated. Conversely, the guy that's kind of floating along, having a great time, telling jokes, smoking cigars, and taking shots and rolling with
yeah.
the punches of life is more in sympathetic or more in parasympathetic than the other
Yeah.
person, and is able to regenerate, and maybe that's the case with some of those people who seem to be violating every biohacking tenant there is,
Yeah.
and living these extraordinary, like a long better than normal outcomes.
Well, that's it. I mean, I was just in Austin recently. I know you were as well. And I was doing some of the introductions on the stage, and I introduced Davinia Taylor, she's a really big name in this country. She's best-selling author, and she talks around sort of hormones and biohacking. She just brought out a book on longevity as well. And I could not believe that 10 minutes before her talk, she was laughing and joking, cracking gags, just like totally relaxed, not looking at her notes, not even bothered. And if that was me, I'd be, having spent many years in TV, I know the state I need to get in before I go on stage. And that is one of, right, I need to really be focused on what I'm doing here. But she just took it all on her stride. Brilliant talk once she got up on the stage as well. Just one of those characters that's sort of like actually probably really good at switching on her parasympathetic nervous system.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
I've always had a policy when I do public speaking to absolutely not. I prefer not to go by slides or stuff. I'll have my team formulate the slides,
Yeah.
and I find I just go out and have a conversation with the audience and lets that flow. And I don't feel the same level of anxiety or stress that a lot of people do in those environments. In fact, any energy that comes up, I've reframed that as energy is being pulled through me from the audience. It's a heightened state of awareness, and
Mm.
it's my goal to steward whatever is coming into me, like is magnetically being pulled through me to the audience. It's a position of service and a position of things, and whatever happens as well, that's fine by me.
That's
I'm not in
awesome.
control of this, and I've always had that attitude. And It's
I wish I was like
invigorating. It was
that.
invigorating. Now, I do know that a lot of the best performers, though, have massive anxiety. One comes to mind is Barbara Streisand, who actually reduced her career because of the anxiety, and one of the greatest singers in American history, for example. So, there's all kinds of sports athletes that are vomiting profusely before the event and go out and et cetera, et cetera. So, I guess my next question is there a variability between individuals in what might be right for one person is not right for another, and how might you determine that?
Yeah. I mean, there certainly is. I was listening to you and thinking, oh God, I'm quite jealous of that. I mean, when I first got my job in TV, I went from being a fairly small-time radio DJ in a small corner of the UK to being on a national, to pretty much the biggest sports TV channel in the world, apart from ESPN. And it took me, there's something about the visuals of TV that I found so hard because it's not just using your voice, which I was used to for years. It's sort of arranging yourself in the right position. And whatever I did, I'd just look a bit anxious on the screen, and I'd go home and my body would ache because I've been sitting in this sort of unnatural position. It took me ages to sort of get over that. So, in answer to your question, definitely, because there's probably other people, and it sounds like you would be a lot more relaxed. How you find that out, I don't know. But I have this sort of I'm working on this sort of, it's a slightly loftily titled in my mind, but a sort of a white paper on what needs to be done based on the research and what I observe as well, which is that we're just all massively overstimulated. And to more
Mm.
or less a degree, we've just got so many inputs that we just do not allow ourselves to relax and enjoy life. And I think, the first one is we've got to escape screens for a very unambitious amount of time every day. And if we don't, well, it's sort of a bit silly because we have to, all the best things in the world don't involve screens, Wade. I think we'll agree. Food, sex, whatever it might be, doesn't involve a screen.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of it is now. People are, they're getting what I find in the digital world, and this might be. We know that it's damaging for childhood development, self-view, personality stuff, ADD, etc., like that. And then we have people eating in front of screens. They're also, I was thinking about this the other day. I think I have like, I don't know, 6,000 friends or something on my Facebook.
Mm,
And I was doing the math. I was like, well, if I spoke to all these individuals for like 2 minutes or 1 minute, it would take me like 6 or 7 weeks of nonstop talking to just have a 1 minute connection with all those people,
yeah.
right? Well, that's not really much depth or connection or whatever. It's like, hi, how's it going? See you later. Bye bye. And we have these low resolution, we've kind of molded these low resolution connections.
Mm,
And then on top of that, a lot of these are what I would call mimicking social behavior. So social media. In my mind, I listen to, for example, I listen to my favorite podcasts, Patrick Bet David. I listen to Jordan Peterson. I listen to Joe Rogan, etc. The Weinsteins, evolutionary biology, various people in a political science and economic person. In my mind, I have a relationship with these individuals.
mm.
Like everybody in the world is friends with Joe Rogan, and he has no idea. And it was funny because I'll give you an example. Matt and I, my business partner, were down in
Yeah.
Austin, and we ran into Joe. We saw Joe walking across the parking lot at the gym we were going to. So we pulled up in our car and said, "Hey, Joe, like, how's it going?" It's like, "Who the hell are you?" And we're like, "Hey, you read some ads for us on the podcast." He goes, "I read a lot of ads for a lot of people." We're like, "Yeah, I know, but we just wanted to say hi, thank you, kind of thing." And so
Yeah.
he handled it really well, but it's always a little bit awkward for the famous person when they're being subject. Like, who are these guys? Are they going to shoot me? Or are they going to harass? Like, you could see that he was,
Yeah.
managing
Yeah.
that, trying to figure out what was going on to the best of our ability. We just want to say hi, thanks a lot, way to go, appreciate it.
Yeah.
But in our minds, when I listened to Joe, like we've listened to hours of Joe. And then I was at another event here at a friend's house, and Joey Diaz showed up
Oh, yeah.
we came over and we're hanging out watching the UFC together. So suddenly
He's
I'm in a
great.
room.
He's so
He's
great,
so
isn't he?
fun.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I love him.
what was
Oh my God, I'd love to
amazing,
meet him.
what was amazing, there was no difference with Joey Diaz
Yeah.
on TV, like on YouTube, versus Joey Diaz in the room with you. It was 100% the same. The crazy
Yeah.
stories, the funny elements, these
Yeah.
elements. And I thought, wow, this is so. What's interesting is YouTube and Facebook, these things, they have brought famous people or connected people or status people really into the room. Concordantly, we have these fantastic, like fantasy relationships with them, which really mimic a relationship. It's one-sided in many ways. And our friends will talk about, like, you hang out with your buddies. Well, we started earlier today. We were talking about a famous podcaster earlier.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh yeah, do you know about this? And so we're talking about this as if this is a friend in our social group in the little village that we lived in 100 years ago. But our interactions are somewhat limited. But it's a conversation as if we're all part of that element, but we're not.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
fascinating. And what is the impact of that on the health is, I guess, where I'm trying to get to. Like, how does that affect the neurochemical system? You know, if you go to the serotonin system of the nervous system, the dominance hierarchy, and where do I fall within that? Does it augment it because I feel that I'm connected with the king, or does it depress it because I'm not that person? I guess that would be an individual aspect. What's your take on that? Would you suggest?
Well, you were talking about the centenarians who were on the street where you grew up, and what was
Yeah.
the sort of common factor? It was probably community. And they weren't spending all day on their screens, and they did feel part of the community.
There was no screens. They all grew a garden. They all were involved in some sort of social connection. They didn't stop doing what they do when they were retired. So even though they were 90 years old or 100 years old, they were still out in their garden pumping around. One of them, Annie, who lived to be 106, she just died recently, just before her 107th birthday. Well, she had a club foot. She could hardly stand up, but she would crawl out to the garden, and my mom would work with her. And she's in there, and the bugs are eating her, and they're digging stuff up, and she loved it. And then she'd come in for the day, and she'd say to my mom, "Wasn't that fun?" At 106 years old,
Yeah.
crawling out into the garden, getting bitten up by bugs and digging in the dirt, and she thought that was just awesome.
What an attitude.
It was it was an extraordinary insight.
Yeah.
Um,
And this whole thing about screens, I sort of think I often think the most important things in the biohacking world are quite a difficult sell. It's really easy to sell someone a device that costs 50,000, or not easy if they haven't got the money, but if they've got the money, it's like, this is going to change your life. But actually, you need to spend less time on screens. It just sounds too basic, doesn't it? But I spoke to someone this week. She was sending me messages. She's quite a bit older and she's had some health issues and she's had an operation and she's feeling a little bit lonely and she feels lonely in her relationship. And she said she'd been talking to ChatGPT, which just broke my heart a little bit. And if there's no other option, it might even be slightly better than talking to nobody, talking to ChatGPT. But when we talk about the power of community in blue zones, are we talking about a community talking to ChatGPT on a screen, or are we talking about actually looking into another human's eyes? And having kids as well, I think there are some aspects to being around people, because we are a social species, that we don't even appreciate how important it is. And one of the things I've noticed recently is wearing this Oura ring. When my boy climbs into bed with me in the middle of the night, the HRV absolutely spikes. My heart rate variability scores improve so much just from having a cuddle in the middle of the night.
That's a fascinating insight, right there. I noticed, with my own young son, that physiologically, when I'm hanging out with him or holding him or pick him up in various times of the day when we get to connect, or just even the seeing of him and his response to me and my response to him, I feel extremely euphoric almost, or pleasant. Like there's a validation, a deep human to human validation. And I'm excited to be responsible for him as a dad. And it's added so much more meaning to the
That's
things in my
amazing.
life. It's also mitigated my stress about these external things. So what was really prior to his birth, just running a large company and all of the things that come with it and all of the challenges that was one thing. But now the challenges since he's been born haven't gotten less. They've extended more. But their impact on me is lessened significantly, because no matter what's going on in the day, I walk upstairs from my office and there he is. And they're dissolved in an instant with a little
Yeah.
drooly smile from, my 7-month-old. And I go, okay, there's something going on here that I can feel viscerally.
Mm.
How do people connect with that? If longevity is their goal, what things have you learned from your research and investigations? Like what's the best practices that seem to, we talked earlier, we can extend maybe life by outcomes by 7.5 years
Mm.
difference if you've got these things. What things do you think are relative for people to consider integrating in their life to, number one, get out of screens is one thing, but then what do you replace that with?
Yeah. I think there's a sort of a surface level one, which is behavior, and then there's the much deeper one, which is sort of deeply held beliefs. And the behavior one
Mm.
is obviously easier to sort out, but it's just still interesting, isn't it? I mean, we all know, especially in the biohacking world, that, for example, morning light is really good for us. And
Yeah.
yet, a lot of people just don't do it, even though they know it's good for them. They just don't step outside. So you have to figure out a way of trying to do it. And so I work on all sorts of surface level behavioral change stuff.
It's a 2 hour difference. So, for example, we have a 2 hour variance within the sun here in Southern California.
Mm.
It's much more profound where I used to live up in Canada, which is much more northern. So you get those early AMs, sunshine in the summer, to late nights, sunny till 10 o'clock
Yeah.
at night. Here, you'll get in this part of the year, as we're getting, to the most light of the year, you get sunshine around 5 o'clock and it's done around 8. But in the darkest part of the year, it might be 7 or so until the
Mm.
light hits. I'm up with the light. Like I get up with the light. So I literally now, since it's been sunny, I'm waking up just at dawn. The light, even though I have curtains that filters in a little bit, that's enough to turn me up, and I'm up and I feel vibrant and active, and I get to the gym a couple hours earlier than normal just on the light variance. And I feel much more rested and recover. I need less sleep. And then when it's darker seasons and I have less light, I find myself, it's a little harder to get up in the morning. It's not as easy to get up and I don't feel as up and at 'em. So I do believe that light perhaps is the biggest oversight in circadian rhythm, and then screens being, again, an artificial light that doesn't have the same mitochondrial enhancing aspect, and there's a lot of indication that it's detrimental.
Yeah, my personal trainer here in Portugal, he knows that I'm into the biohacking and the longevity stuff, and he sort of looked at me really excitedly the other day, and he was like, "What's your best biohack?" And I said, "Oh, just getting outside in the morning." And he looked so disappointed. I think he wanted some sort of, device that attaches electrodes to the head or something.
Right, right.
Yeah. But if we don't do it, we have to figure out a way to do it because we know it's good for us. And, going back to the biohackers who know all this stuff, but don't necessarily have the habits that back up a longevity lifestyle, you could look at something really similar like James Clear's habit stacking, where you stack one
Atomic Habits.
habit.
He's the writer of Atomic Habits,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, and he's so good. And he might suggest something like, well, you have your cup of coffee outside, and for you're stacking one habit onto another. And for me, I've sort of done even better because my boy always likes to have a game of football before he goes to school. I get some exercise outside with him, and those are two habits. It's really easy to remember because he's not going to let me forget to go outside. So it's just a good example of how you can sort of stack the habits, and then it just becomes part of your routine, and then you end up doing it every day.
Yeah, I think that's the other part of it is cultivating those habits. And
Mm.
sometimes we want to do everything at once. And I noticed I recently started running again. So a couple years ago, I got hyper motivated at 50 to do some bodybuilding contests, which turned out really well.
Oh,
And
great.
yeah, I went back to the world championships at 50, which was
No
remarkable.
way. So
Yeah.
you were doing it when you were like 25 or 30, and
Yeah.
then you went
Yeah. So,
back.
yeah. Well, I wanted to see if I could get to that, how close I could get to my previous form at 50, as opposed to, I think my last contest was in 2007. So maybe that was 15 years prior, right?
Mm.
35. And so I came back at 50. And afterwards, I decided that I was going to go run a marathon. So I had never ran before. And I had to psychically prepare myself and imagine it in my mind for months that I was going to run and I was going to do this. And then I started out briefly and it was relatively painful and challenging. And I went through that period and then it kind of came on. 6 months later, I ran my first marathon, which was awesome, but that was maybe a little too fast. Trashed myself between the contest dieting and the marathon and everything. I was like, oh man, running just fell off. And
Mm.
then recently I was like, yeah, there's a real part of running I enjoyed. I want to get back into it. So I restarted the habit and, but I'm doing it as an inspirational piece. It's like, okay, I feel like running and I'm going to limit my runs to this amount of time. And it's just naturally falling back into place again. And it's enjoyable and it's fun. It's not on a rigid schedule. It's working within my regular training workout, which is really easy for me. My weight training workout, I don't feel right if I don't do it. But
Mm.
running is not something that's innate for me. It's like, oh man, it's bodybuilders typically don't run much. And I'm enjoying that small process and that progressive part. Now he breaks things down to like 5 or 10 minutes, I think, in Atomic
Yeah.
Habits, right?
Yeah. And something, I mean, another author that I absolutely love is Robert Cialdini, who wrote The Psychology of Persuasion.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, because we're looking at, with that, people think it's all about persuading other people. But to me, a lot of the most powerful techniques are persuading yourself to do something.
100%.
Yeah.
How would you suggest a person goes about persuading themselves in order to do the things that you're supposed to do, but maybe haven't? And what do you think stops people from doing that? Are they trying to do too much, or they think that a little bit's not good enough and they're just not building the habit? Where do you think trips people up?
I do worry that, in our world, there's a little bit too much Mark Wahlberg style getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning and having, cryotherapy tank before 4 a.m., that sort of thing. But I would just say, the two of those Robert Cialdini principles, which work so well for me, some of the people that I work with, are accountability and commitment. So the more public your commitment, the more likely you're going to do something. If you tell 200 people on Facebook that you're going to go and do another bodybuilding competition after you haven't done one for 15 years, you're more likely to do it than if you just say it in your head. And that's a public commitment. And then the other thing is, if you're like me and like most people, you're quite competitive. So if you set up a separate WhatsApp group with someone, maybe your partner, maybe a friend, and you track whatever you want to track. I sort of almost stumbled into this by accident because me and my wife we set up a WhatsApp group for workouts and it just worked so well. I know I feel good after a workout, but I used to struggle to get myself to the gym. I don't know why. And so every day we would track the exact amount of minutes that we'd worked out. And at the end of the month, if she'd beaten me, I was like, hang on a second. Or if I added up the minutes and I worked out that I hadn't worked out for long enough for the month, I found that very frustrating. So over the course of several years, I mean, we're probably a bit weird, but we've got various WhatsApp groups. We've got one for meditation. I've got one for learning Portuguese because I found it quite hard to do 10 minutes of Portuguese practice every day, and one for workouts, and the other really key one, which has made a massive difference to my life, one for leaving the phone out of the bedroom just before going to
Hmm.
sleep because I haven't got the self-control not to check it if it's in the bedroom.
Right. So you're saying accountability to some sort of social structure is probably the key element of habitual integration. And maybe that's the blue zone element that is unconscious, is that the social structure within these blue zones are actually more contributive than just, the good oxygen or whatever, that they have these contracts essentially with their community, that they see their friends down at the corner, or they go pick fruit together, or they go fish together, or they have responsibilities with their grandchildren, or whatever it happens to be. I know one of the things that came out of my dad's mouth the first time that he got to see his son at Christmas time, or his grandson, and he says, okay, I've got to figure out a way to live long enough to see him be a teenager.
Oh,
right?
yeah. That's
But that was a statement that he made in his mind, like, I need to figure this out. So maybe life wasn't as exciting and energizing or important at that point, but with the birth of his grandson and seeing it, it was so reaffirming for him. He's like, man, I'm excited about what happens with this guy. And I send them pictures, and they have pictures, and they talk to my grandson, or they talk about him, or they share it with their friends. So there's this whole element of life in the future that's positive when the physicality is starting to diminish. And I watch how it's invigorating for them. They were just out here, and I can see it physiologically, that it's invigorating for both of my parents, and they're excited about this future that maybe wasn't as exciting before. What other elements do you think people should consider when getting started on these kind of longevity, psychological behavioral attitudes?
Well, as I said, I'm sort of working in my head on this very grandly titled white paper, which is sort of just a basic theory that, based on the science, if we do a couple of things based around behavior and then beliefs, we can actually measure that people's markers around longevity are going to be loads better. And so that is a much better habit. So sort of a certain amount of time off screens every day. And then something which is slightly harder to do straight off the bat, which is 20 minutes a day of some sort of meditation or hypnosis, and something around belief and behavior change. So obviously, you and I both trained in hypnosis and NLP, and that's something that you can sort of work in really easily if you're sort of listening to an audio or something like that. But when you start to think about deeply held behavior beliefs, your dad, for example, perhaps before he met his grandson, he did have some sort of belief that he might not live to him being a teenager.
Absolutely. Or there was no inspiration or aspirational goal to go through. When my dad worked a tremendous amount and defined his life by work, which leads me to the next question that I've been robustly investigating, and that is AI and its impact. So if you think to how the world has been structured for a very, very long time, you can think this in social situations. Well, you meet a new group of people for whatever reason, and, oh, hello, Bob, or hello, Mary, how are you? And, oh, what is it that you do? Oh, I'm a so-and-so, and I do this and this. Oh, tell me more about that. And you see people get invigorated and talking, but there's a whole identity that is wrapped up in their work. And then there's a whole identity wrapped up in family, and you have the empty nest syndrome. But now, with the coming disruption into the work element, by all indications, we're probably heading into the most disruptive time in human history. And I believe that it will create two divergent paths. And I'd like your opinion on it. Divergent path number one is, this is threatening. Life has no meaning. I'm going to do a depressive state and die out relatively quickly from the disease. And another one is, oh, here's an opportunity where I can redefine my life, as from a societal perspective, is that we can outsource a tremendous amount of productivity to AI, which means we will have to develop an entirely different economic system on productivity and distributed productivity, because AI is essentially conceptualized on a productivity making machine, but productivity doesn't necessarily mean life affirming. And I'm sure Foxconn workers are extremely productive and they're jumping out of the buildings because of it. So
Yeah.
productivity without meaning, like what do you see coming with the AI revolution? There's a predictive elements and there's health elements and all those elements, but then there's also the disruptive social anxiety, and you see it starting to manifest now. What do you think about that?
Well, I also do a lot of deep thinking around AI and have noticed a huge change. One of the things that I do on the side is as well as being an author, and that is my main gig, I help other authors publish their books. And the amount of legwork that AI has taken out of publishing a book now, not the writing of it, but everything else, it's just unbelievable. If you're hoping for bright siding on our AI future, I'm not sure I can provide it because I
Mm.
feel I'm sadly fairly doom and gloom about it. But the ray
Mm.
of hope for me is that living here in Portugal, in our little corner of Portugal, it's a very unconsumerist, down to earth, laid back, non-flashy lifestyle. Nobody here seems to work that hard. I seem to work quite hard, but a lot of other people don't work that hard. Nobody is very interested in what other people do. I mean, they're sort of interested, but status symbols just don't seem to matter so much. What matters is a sort of, I think, a more ancestral order of priorities. Family, friends, good food, spending time outside in nature, a very simple way of socializing, sort of meals together, that sort of thing. And that gives me hope that in some ways it's really quite old fashioned, but it seems to work very well. So if that is the case and people aren't working that hard and aren't identifying too much with their work, maybe there is some hope. But I fear that it's going to be an extremely painful transition based on how much of my work I'm already outsourcing to AI.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's a good question.
And
Um,
you?
I'm I'm a mixed. I believe that we'll probably go through a period of dystopia that will be very dramatic and potentially massively destructive to society as it is. And
Mm,
then I do think that we'll reformulate after that. So what does that look like? I have no idea. I think it's impossible to ask. I think it's important to calibrate to optimism. My tendency would to be pessimistic for certain on it but I also don't want to be ossified as a legacy of wanting the world to be back what it was in the 1970s under this ideal that was the perfect time and the perfect life that I grew up in.
yeah.
And I certain have a certain nostalgic for the past, but as I'm confronting this world with my son in particular,
Mm,
I go, well, what is the best attitude that I can have for my son to project some sort of value element of a world that he'll never see, or to generate some sort of positive element and outcome that he can take advantage of these things and be competent in the world as it is in his time. And whether that's right or wrong, it's my duty as a parent to calibrate towards the latter, independent of my anxious elements.
mm,
For him, we got to put our best forward because this is the world he's living,
yeah.
and we've brought him into the world, my wife and I. So therefore, let's hold in mind a positive outcome
Mm,
while also balancing it with a little bit of realism and objectivity, which is very difficult given the nature of this technology. We haven't experienced anything that's so disruptive.
mm,
He might miss the brunt of it. My suspicion is that he'll go through, it'll be well established and cultivated by the time he's an adult. And my goal is to make sure that he's competent with it within every field and hopefully maintain some of these human values that may not be apparent. And that's going to be a challenge as that's the challenge of our times.
sure is. I mean, I feel like every time in sort of fairly recent history, life has just seemed a bit shit. And you sort of think, oh God, what's going to happen now? Whether you look at anytime from the Second World War onwards, or the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the 70s with massive rampant inflation. And so actually, objectively, we're probably, most people in the world are a little bit better off than at those times. And so maybe we are
Yes.
overly pessimistic about it.
Who knows? But who knows, right? And again, that's once again, much of this is coming in from our screens and our information. So, and the
Mm,
algorithm rewards negativity,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
And so one has to be discerning and step away from the negative perceptual elements of tech, and like you said, go out and I take my son down for a walk down to the beach and see the plants. And it might be that we go so things become so cybernetic that the organic world will actually become hyper novel,
Mm.
like real trees that you can smell, and real sand that you can feel, as opposed to these mimicking aspects that the screens do.
And, for all the technology and for all the advances, I'm working quite closely with someone at the moment who's an expert in the cancer space and brings all sorts of different technologies from the sort of functional world into, or the integrative world into traditional cancer therapies, and studies the science to see what works, what doesn't, what can we use alongside chemotherapy and this, that, and the other. And after years and years of being in this space and working with hundreds of patients, many of whom have died, he sort of thinks that the most important thing is a connection with one's true identity and purpose, which often includes psychedelics. Because whether you're going to heal yourself or not, at least you're going to understand and you're going to be at peace with your life and death and what's going on, which is it's the most ancient technology, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think at the baseline of all fears is the fear of death. So we can kind of come full circle here. What is the whole biohacking longevity aspect, is to push our relationship with death as far into the future confrontation as possible.
Mm,
Now, I know in my own journey, I was confronted with death at relatively early with my sister's illness, and she died at 22. And so we had lots of deep conversations, especially after she had gone terminal. And I got to learn the kind of thought process of someone who's in the throes of dying, especially at a young age, was very
mm,
impactful for me. And as tragic as it was, I was able to extract a lot of value out of that and had to confront my own uh, mortality. I think that the value of maybe psychedelic elements is it takes people into an experience that is so divergent from their day-to-day behavior that it makes some of these esoteric ideologies or conceptuologies or religious overtures that we've learned about in the different religions a real experiential reality. The metaphysical becomes experiential, and it's
yeah,
significantly divergent from day-to-day life.
yeah.
Now, that can be super disruptive if you have a tendency, if you don't have a great neurological uptake, that you can trigger psychosis, and you see that happening or repeated perverse. So not everybody is geared for
Mm,
those type of relationships. But if you are, I think it does serve as a wonderful pattern interrupt for people, and should be taken under proper guidance of the right individuals. My wife, who is taking her PhD right now, she's did a comparative analysis between cognitive behavioral therapy, uh, psychedelic plant medicine experience, and neurofeedback. Turns out neurofeedback
wow.
probably is more promising than either cognitive behavioral therapy and psychedelics. What I believe is that all three modalities can actually be used for even a more complete and synthesized or customized experience for the individual based on individual neurochemistry, predominant elements, having someone to help you leverage those altered states in a productive way as opposed to just a phantasmagoria kind of way.
Mm.
And we've been doing a lot of work in that element, and I'm predictive that we're going to see an explosion. We are already on that trend, but now the research is supporting it, because really the anxiety of CBT and the pharmaceutical interactions, the outcomes are essentially non-existent. And we have to come up with a better model. And I think that these things are positive, and maybe AI will contribute to that and be able to make it more available, or make us have more time to be able to do these things, meditative processes, these type of things. I think as we develop the qualitative aspect of life, it will give meaning to the quantitative data that we generate from research.
Yeah, because neurofeedback, that's really interesting that she found that was sort of up there potentially as being better. I did Dave Asprey's 40 Years of Zen. You've done that as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so I started
Yeah.
out, I did, first I went to Dr. Hart's Biocybernaut. So he was a student of Kamiya
Yeah.
way back, and then went to 40 Years of Zen. And then we've developed our own format called Metamorphosis, which is another
Have you?
version beyond
Wow.
that. Yeah, we've been working that for a number of years. And it's sophisticated now and customized now to a level of, it is experiential beyond most psychedelic experiences that we've been
Mm.
able to cultivate with people. So these things are accessible through your own inner pharmacy, which
That's
is
great. I'm
phenomenal.
coming to do yours. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal. And we're hyper motivated to bring more of that to the world, and to canonize that in
Mm.
quantitative research. Vanderkook right now is out there on the circuit demonstrating the efficacy of that, and of
Mm.
course plant medicine can also be an augmentation. The thing with neurofeedback is that you can strip out the people, you can treat the people who might be more prone to psychotic incidents, which can happen with improperly administration of psychedelic medicines, and the potential for abuse in psychedelic medicines is up there, because some people just, them, I call them, they're the festers. They're going to another festival, another ceremony, another event, another thing, and they're kind of on that circuit without very much integration. They're
Yeah.
just chasing the highs or the experiential realities, but those aren't
Yeah.
integrated and embodied in their lives. And often they have a distorted sense of reality. And you see them up on social media, peace, love, and everything, and you get to know them, and their life is a train wreck. And so there's a distortion between the presentation of what's happening versus the reality of what's happening. So that's where
Yeah.
a good practitioner will be able to give you the insights, I think. So
Well, I mean, if you could distill longevity mindset down to a few words, it'd be if you don't sort out your deep shit, you're not going to live as long as you could do. And you mentioned a good practitioner. I mean, my first functional medicine practitioner was Dr. Mark Atkinson. Do you remember him? He
right.
was
Yeah.
the training director for Bulletproof and sort of
Mhm.
Dave Asprey's right-hand man for years. And oh, he did some amazing. He introduced me to the concept of methylation 10, 15 years ago. And he just suggested that I took an addiction questionnaire. And that just opened up the deepest 5 years of psychotherapy rabbit hole you could ever imagine. But thank God he did, because I wouldn't be sat here and I wouldn't be married with a family unless I'd done that really important deep work. However you sort of choose to do the work, you do have to sort of confront those deeper elements.
This has been a wonderful interview. We've learned a lot. I want to turn it over to you. Is there anything that you'd like to cover, or where people can reach you, find out about your books, follow your podcast, all of that, those elements?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, well, Tony Wrighton on Instagram is probably the best place if people want to listen to the podcast. It's Biohacking News by Zestology. You've been on the podcast before, so has Matt as well. And don't take your phone into the bedroom with you at night. It's just you're just going to sleep better without it there.
There you go. Don't take your phone to the bedroom. Practice the habits that lead you to more light and more love in your life, and you probably have a better chance of living longer and stronger than, by giving your kids a hug late at night, than
Yeah.
working on that deep sleep to make sure that your score is perfect. So thank you so much for joining us today, Tony. We'll put all the links into the show notes. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on the Awesome Health Podcast. I love your comments. And of course, if you like the show, please feel free to share it. I'm Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers. This is the Awesome Health Show. Have yourself a great day.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.